You thought it was just a coincidence. You brushed it off like it meant nothing. But something in your chest tightened the moment it happened. A strange pull, like an echo from somewhere you couldn't name, like you were being nudged by something you couldn't see but couldn't ignore either. You saw the same numbers again. You heard the same sentence in two different places. You met a stranger who said exactly what you needed to hear without knowing anything about you, and for a split second, you felt like time had curved, like life wasn't random anymore, like something was trying to tell you something. And maybe you weren't crazy for feeling it. Maybe that moment wasn't random. Maybe you're not imagining these signs. Maybe they're imagining you back. Jung never believed in randomness the way most people do. He called it synchronicity, meaningful coincidence, a moment when your inner world and the outer world intersect. Not because you caused it, but because you were ready for it. And what if I told you this video isn't just something you stumbled on while scrolling? What if this is the sign you keep missing? What if you're about to understand why your soul keeps circling back to the same kind of people, the same kind of pain, the same time of year when everything falls apart again, and again, and again? You think you're just unlucky, but what if you've actually been deeply aligned, not with fate, but with a lesson you keep skipping? Synchronicity isn't flashy, it's not loud, it doesn't shout, it whispers. It shows up in the quietest way, in the person who leaves too quickly, in the sentence that lingers longer than it should, in the thing you didn't plan but changed you anyway. And if you're paying attention, really paying attention, you start to see that nothing is random, not the pain, not the people, not even this moment right here. Carl Jung once said, synchronicity is an ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see. So the only real question now is, have you started to see it yet? Or are you still calling it coincidence? Are you still walking through your life like you're lost, while the universe keeps lighting up the signs under your feet, hoping that just this once, you'll stop, turn around, and listen? You thought it was just a fluke, a funny little moment life threw at you, like when you bump into someone you were just thinking about, or when a song plays with lyrics that speak to exactly what you're going through, or when you open a book to a page that answers a question you haven't even asked out loud. You laugh, you shrug, you tell yourself it's nothing, but a part of you pauses. Deep inside there's a little shiver. Not fear exactly, but familiarity, recognition. Something ancient in you just nodded, and it didn't feel random. It felt intimate, personal, like life just brushed your shoulder and whispered, I see you. And even if you ignore it, even if you dismiss it, that feeling lingers. Jung believed that these moments matter. He called them synchronicity, and he warned us that when these events show up, they are not accidents, they are maps. Moments when the invisible and the visible converge, when the inner state you carry starts reflecting itself back through the people you meet, the time you're drawn to look at the clock, the quiet voice that tells you to go one way instead of another, and suddenly you're somewhere you never expected but needed to be. Synchronicity isn't about controlling life. It's about being aligned with something bigger than what your ego can predict. It's not about magical thinking. It's about meaningful connection between your psyche and the world outside. Carl Jung said it this way, synchronicity reveals the meaningful connection between the subjective and the objective world. And once you experience it, truly feel it, you can't unsee it. The pattern begins to emerge. And it doesn't matter how small the moment was, you just know it mattered. You know you were supposed to be there. To see that sign, to hear that voice, to feel that presence. It's as if reality bent a little to meet your soul halfway, and it leaves a mark, not one you can show others, but one that shifts something deep in you. And the more you pay attention, the more it happens. Not because you're making it up, but because you've finally tuned in. Synchronicity doesn't speak the language of logic, it speaks the language of symbols, of intuition, of soul. And that's why most people miss it, because they're listening with the wrong ears, looking with the wrong eyes, and moving through life too fast to notice when the universe pauses for them. And yet it does, over and over again. If you've ever felt like something happened at the perfect time, if you've ever thought I needed that, even if you couldn't explain why, then you've already touched this. You've already felt the fabric of synchronicity without naming it. And now you're being invited to look deeper, not just at what happens, but why it keeps happening, why the same signs appear, why the timing feels eerie, why something you almost ignored keeps returning in different forms. And what if it's not just to comfort you? What if it's to wake you up? What if synchronicity is not just a sign you're on the right path, but a moment that begs you to slow down, to question, to shift, to remember that not everything real can be measured, and not everything random is meaningless? What if those little shivers are not tricks of the brain, but confirmations from the soul? What if you've been seen this whole time, and you're only now starting to see back? You've felt it before, haven't you? That moment you couldn't explain but also couldn't forget? Maybe it happened years ago, maybe it was yesterday, but it didn't fade. It stayed, and now it's here again. This moment, this message, this line you're hearing right now. And it's not screaming at you, it's whispering, like synchronicity always does. Quiet but undeniable, strange but familiar. Like it was meant only for you, and maybe it was. You've been taught to ask for what you want, to write it down, visualize it, speak it into existence. You've been told that if you think positive, the universe will reward you, that if you're grateful enough, high vibe enough, you'll finally attract what your heart desires. But what if it's not that simple? What if the universe doesn't respond to your wants, but to your essence? What if it's not listening to your words, but to your wounds, your unresolved stories, your energetic signature? What if synchronicity isn't about what you're trying to call in, but what you're already radiating without realizing it? You want love, but you carry fear. You want peace, but you live in control. You want clarity, but you stay busy to avoid yourself. And so synchronicity doesn't bring what you wrote down in your journal. It brings you what you need to face. The person who mirrors your insecurity, the challenge that cracks your illusion of control, the loss that reveals where you've attached your identity too tightly. Carl Jung didn't speak in terms of manifestation, but he understood alignment at the deepest level. He said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And that becoming doesn't happen by wishing. It happens when you face the parts of yourself you've rejected, because that's what synchronicity responds to, not the mask you show the world, but the frequency underneath. And the strange thing is, the more you chase what you want, the more you push it away, because chasing is rooted in lack, and synchronicity doesn't bloom in lack. It blooms in presence, in wholeness, in truth. When you are finally honest with yourself about who you are, what you carry, what you haven't healed, what you still run from, then synchronicity begins to shift. It no longer reflects your wounds, it reflects your wisdom, and that's when the signs you start seeing feel lighter, more graceful, less punishing, more guiding. But until then, synchronicity keeps showing up like a teacher with the same lesson again and again. Not because life is cruel, but because your soul is consistent. It won't stop showing you what you need to become aware of, even if you keep ignoring it. And that's the secret no one talks about when they glamorize signs and patterns and angel numbers. Synchronicity is not just a cosmic wink. It's a call to self-honesty. It shows you who you are being, not who you're pretending to be. And the danger is that if you only look for signs that affirm your desires, you'll miss the signs that are inviting you to transform. If you only ask for ease, you might miss the storm that was sent to free you from a life that was too small for you. And yes, sometimes synchronicity feels gentle, but other times it arrives like a jolt, like a breakup you didn't expect, like a detour you didn't want, like silence when you were begging for an answer. But all of it is information. All of it is intelligence from the unconscious, reflecting the current state of your being. And if you're paying attention, you'll begin to see a shift when you do. A different kind of synchronicity begins to appear, one that doesn't hurt, but heals, not because the world changed, but because you did. And it always starts with honesty, the courage to look in the mirror and admit what part of you has been calling this in, not from a place of blame, but of awareness. Because awareness is the first step out of repetition, and when you finally become conscious of what's behind the attraction, you stop being a magnet for what hurts you, and start becoming a lighthouse for what frees you. And that's when you stop asking why this keeps happening to you, and you start asking what this is trying to awaken in you. And that's where we're going next. You thought it was over. You thought you'd learned a lesson. You thought you moved on, healed, closed the chapter. But here it is again, in a new disguise, a different person, a new city, a new job, a new dynamic, but the same discomfort, the same trigger, the same sinking feeling in your chest. And you wonder, why do I keep ending up here? Is it bad luck, poor choices, karma, or something deeper? The truth is, it's none of those things in isolation, and all of them together in another way. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This is not just poetic, it is psychological fact. When a pattern repeats, it is not punishment, it is programming. And synchronicity becomes the mirror of that programming. It shows you the loop not to mock you, but to wake you. The people you meet, the situations you stumble into, the emotional spirals you fall back into, are not accidents. They are echoes. They are projections of the very things inside you, still unresolved, still active, still calling. The shots behind the curtain of your mind. And here's the twist. It's not about the people or the places. It's about the part of you that is drawn to them. or creates them, unconsciously. This is where synchronicity reveals its deeper function, not just as a magical alignment, but as a feedback loop between your soul and your story. The outer world shows you your inner code, and until that code is rewritten, the same plot will repeat, only the costumes change. And this is why your growth isn't measured by how many affirmations you recite, but by how differently you respond when the same test appears in a new form. Maybe last time you begged for love, this time you walk away with dignity. Maybe before you collapsed under pressure, now you breathe and set a boundary. Maybe last time you didn't even notice the red flags, and now you can't unsee them. That's evolution. That's awareness, breaking the loop. But here's the uncomfortable part: you can't fake that shift. Synchronicity knows the difference. It's not about pretending to be healed, it's about becoming unshakably honest with where you're still operating from fear. And when the same situation arises again, you have two choices: fall back into the pattern, or rise with presence. One leads to regret, the other to release. The cycle continues until you no longer need the lesson. And this is not spiritual punishment. This is profound mercy. Imagine if the universe gave up on you after the first time, the second time, the 10th time, but it doesn't. It keeps reflecting back what needs integration, again and again, because that's how consciousness matures. Not by escaping the loop, but by waking up inside it. And here's where Jung's work becomes invaluable, because he teaches us that the psyche seeks wholeness above comfort. It doesn't want you to stay in the familiar, it wants you to grow into the forgotten. And that growth happens through confrontation, not avoidance. Synchronicity is not here to give you what you think you want. It's here to prepare you for who you're meant to become. And that often means stripping away the illusions you still cling to, the roles you still perform, the lies you still believe about what love is, what success means, what your worth depends on. And each repetition is a mirror sharper than the last, showing you what you didn't want to see last time, not to hurt you, but to invite you into truth. So the next time you say, "Why is this happening again?" pause and ask, "What is this still trying to teach me?" Because when the lesson is integrated, the cycle softens. The teacher no longer needs to shout. The signs become subtler and more supportive. But only when you stop denying the pattern and start seeing your power to respond differently. That's when synchronicity stops feeling like fate and starts feeling like freedom. And that's where we're headed next. You can beg for it, cry for it, meditate for hours, chant affirmations and set your intentions under every full moon. But synchronicity won't come when you demand it. Synchronicity isn't a cosmic vending machine. It doesn't answer desperation. It responds to alignment. And that's the twist most people never see coming. Carl Jung never spoke of manifestation as wish-granting. He saw it as the natural unfolding of what is psychologically ripe. What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size, he said. And what you unconsciously chase with fear will only outrun you. Synchronicity does not obey hope. It obeys inner readiness. Not your fantasy, but your frequency. That's why some of the biggest shifts in your life came not when you were screaming for help, but when you surrendered, when you finally let go of trying to force what your soul wasn't ready to hold. It came when something in you changed, when your energy stopped asking and started becoming, when you no longer chased meaning outside yourself but embodied it from within. This is the key people miss. Synchronicity doesn't validate your want, it mirrors your state. So if you want to meet someone deeply aligned, don't pray for them to appear. Become the version of you who could hold that connection without losing yourself. If you long for a breakthrough, don't scream into the universe. Prepare the foundation so that when it comes, it can stay. Synchronicity is subtle but fierce. It doesn't reward wishful thinking. It reveals unconscious contradictions. And until your inner world is congruent, the outer world won't deliver. And this is where Jung's work becomes brutally honest. Because he doesn't give us a shortcut, he gives us the shadow. He invites us to go inward and face the resistance, the wounds, the unresolved grief, the stories we still live through. And it's through this confrontation that the soul matures into coherence. Not perfection, but resonance. And that's what synchronicity is listening for. Not your words, but your wholeness. And here's the paradox. The more you chase the sign, the further it moves. Not to mock you, but to protect you from receiving what you're not yet able to sustain. Because synchronicity is not kind in the way you expect. It's kind in the way growth demands. It waits until your readiness is no longer a performance, but a truth. And this is why people often say, "It came when I least expected it," because they stopped manipulating the process. They became the person they needed to be, and the timing met them there. This isn't about being passive, it's about becoming powerful in stillness. It's about knowing that the universe doesn't speak English or math. It speaks energy. and that energy responds to congruence. So if you've been waiting for the sign, stop looking outward. Look inward, ask yourself, have I really become the version of me that can meet what I'm asking for? And if the answer is no, then that's your path. Not to force synchronicity to come, but to create the condition where it naturally emerges. Because synchronicity doesn't come to rescue you, it comes to reflect you. And once you understand that, you stop begging for signs and start becoming the signal. And when you become the signal, the right door doesn't just open, it glows. And that's what we're about to walk toward next. They don't look like miracles, but they change everything. You expect transformation to arrive with clarity, but it often begins with confusion. Not because you're lost, but because something deeper has been activated. And the first sign is always silence, not absence, but the quiet rearrangement of your inner world, where what once felt right suddenly feels strange. And the people who used to feel like home now feel like echoes of someone you used to be. And that subtle discomfort, that creeping restlessness, it isn't anxiety. It's a signal, a symbolic whisper that your psyche is trying to speak to you. In the only language it knows, metaphor, energy, and pattern, Carl Jung said. The psyche speaks in images, and these images appear as symbols in our waking life. Strange repetitions, uncanny timing, the sense that something is watching, organizing, preparing not to trap you, but to align you. Because before a shift comes, the world gets louder with strange silence. And if you ignore it, it doesn't go away. It just returns harder, more disruptive, until you listen. This is when you start waking up heavy, not from sleep, but from shedding layers. Memories resurface. People from your past reappear in dreams, or in songs, or in thoughts you thought you buried. And none of it is random, Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious. It will direct your life and you will call it fate. And here, the unconscious is not hiding. It is begging to be seen. Through synchronicities that feel too precise to ignore, yet too subtle to prove. Maybe you keep seeing the same numbers. Maybe someone new reminds you of someone old. Maybe life keeps placing you in the same emotional dilemma with different costumes, and the lesson isn't to escape, it's to recognize the pattern. To realize that what you call coincidence is really consciousness in disguise. Not happening to you, but through you. Synchronicity is not a reward, it's an invitation. It doesn't confirm that you're special. It reminds you that you are connected. And when things begin to fall apart around you, what if it's not destruction, but reassembly? The ego sees chaos. The soul sees choreography. And what feels like rejection might actually be redirection. Something your soul orchestrated before you were even aware of what it needed. What if all the delays, the endings, the weird feelings, were just signs that the old you has finished its cycle? To see synchronicity clearly, you must first accept that your rational mind is not in charge anymore. Your deeper self is. And that self does not speak in logic. It speaks in nudges, moods, gut pulls, and energy shifts. So if you're waiting for confirmation in words, you'll miss the confirmation happening all around you. This is why transformation often begins with a strange emotional fog. You feel off but can't explain why. You feel distant from your friends, uninterested in your old goals, drawn to strange symbols, books, or people you never noticed before. And this is not coincidence. It's convergence. The collapse of your outer distractions so you can finally hear your inner direction. So ask yourself this. Have you been ignoring the little signs because they didn't come with certainty? Have you dismissed the whispers because they didn't shout? Maybe it's time to reframe what you call confusion as sacred reordering. Not because everything is clear now, but because everything unclear has meaning. In the next part, we'll go deeper into what synchronicity is really reflecting back to you, and why the universe seems to test your readiness right at the edge of awakening. You can beg for signs, but signs don't come to the desperate. They come to the prepared. To those who have shed enough illusions to finally perceive what was always there, not because they earned it, but because they stopped resisting it. And that's the paradox. The more you chase synchronicity, the more it eludes you, because synchronicity isn't a result of effort, it's the byproduct of alignment. Carl Jung never described it as magic. He called it the acausal connecting principle, meaning it isn't caused by will, but by resonance. You align your inner state, and the outer world reflects it back to you. Like a mirror that was always there but only lights up when you finally switch on from within. And this is where most people get stuck. They keep praying for answers but never change the frequency from which they're asking. They want a new path but keep showing up with the same fear, same bitterness, same closed heart, and the universe, like a tuning fork, only responds when you vibrate differently. So the real shift isn't external, it's internal. You don't Attract what you want, you attract what you are, and this is not punishment, it's precision. Because before the universe sends a signal, it checks if you're tuned to receive it. And if you're not, the signal still comes, but you won't hear it. It will echo through your life as missed chances, repeated patterns, unexplained resistance. And until you shift internally, you'll keep calling this stagnation. But what if it's spiritual safety? Maybe the absence of signs is not a punishment, but protection. Maybe you're being kept from doors you're not yet stable enough to walk through, because synchronicity has weight. It carries meaning, and if you're not ready, that meaning can collapse you instead of awaken you. Jung warned us, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And synchronicity forces that confrontation. It reveals what you're really aligned with. Not what you say you want, but what your vibration invites. So don't be fooled by the silence. It's not empty, it's diagnostic. It shows you where you still avoid yourself, where you still deny your truth, where you're not yet in sync with the life you're praying for. And that dissonance, that delay, it's not rejection, it's refinement. You're not being tested to fail. You're being filtered to evolve. And when the shift finally comes, it won't look like a grand revelation. It will feel like inner clarity, like your body recognizing a frequency it forgot it knew. The coincidences will begin not because you earned them, but because you matched them, because you stopped trying to force a future and started living as if it were already here. And then, the world responds. People show up, paths reveal themselves, and you realize it was never about praying harder, but about clearing the noise, quieting the fear, softening into readiness. So the question is not, why hasn't the universe sent me a sign, but what part of me is still unwilling to receive it? And if you dare to ask that, to sit in that discomfort, you'll find that the answer was always waiting, not outside of you, but inside the version of you you're becoming. In the next chapter, we'll decode how synchronicity becomes the mirror that reflects back what your soul is finally brave enough to see. It happens quietly, almost like the shift of a tide. When you stop scanning the sky for answers, the answers begin to move within you, not because the universe was withholding them, but because your desperation was drowning the signal. Synchronicity is not summoned by need, but by readiness. Carl Jung said, "We do not see things as they are, we see them as we are." And as long as you are still pleading for signs, you are not seen from wholeness, but from fracture. The universe does not respond to your words. It responds to your frequency, and desperation is the frequency of separation, of disconnection. When you chase signs to escape your emptiness, you repel them, not because they are cruel, but because they are sacred. Synchronicity is not a crutch for your fear. It's a mirror for your alignment. When you finally surrender, not out of defeat, but of clarity, when you stop praying from lack and start living from trust, the signs return, but not as fireworks, as footprints, subtle, soft, repetitive. They follow the new rhythm you've embodied, and suddenly the same world feels alive with hidden choreography. The songs make sense, the conversations feel placed, the delay that used to torment you now feels like divine pacing. And this isn't magic, it's maturity. It's what Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are," because once you stop begging the world to change, and start letting your perception shift, the world changes around you. Synchronicity is not given to the needy, it's revealed to the ready, to the still, to the ones who no longer demand but receive. And the shift is emotional. You feel less urgency, but more certainty, less fear, but more attention. And this state of being changes everything, because synchronicity doesn't just offer confirmation, it offers communion, a dialogue with something bigger than yourself, not to make you feel powerful, but to remind you that you are part of a greater design. And the moment you stop pleading, that design becomes visible, but only when you release the grip of expectation, because expecting a sign is still a form of control, and control comes from fear, the very fear that clouds your inner vision. So when you begin to walk, not in search of signs, but in search of truth, the signs appear, not because you need them, but because you're now aligned with the flow they always rode upon. What if the silence you feared was never a void, but a test? What if the absence of signs was not punishment, but preparation? And when you no longer beg for answers, but embody your becoming, the answers rise to meet you, not as external proof, but as internal knowing. So the real question is not, why isn't the universe responding, but, am I finally quiet enough to hear it? In the next chapter, we'll explore what happens when synchronicity becomes more than a coincidence, but a calling, a guide not just to understand your path, but to step fully into it. You were never meant to chase signs. You were meant to notice what's already been echoing inside you. Synchronicity doesn't come to reward your longing. It comes to reveal your alignment. And that's why the signs never show up when you're begging for them. They show up when you begin to trust without proof, when your actions reflect a deeper truth even before you can name it. This is why synchronicity is not a gift. It's a mirror, Carl Jung said. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. And this is the core of synchronicity. It reflects not your wishful thinking, but your inner coherence, your congruence between soul and step, thought and action. And here's the paradox. When you're lost, in the chaos, and you want a sign the most, that's when they disappear. Not because the universe is cruel, but because it's quiet until you are. Because synchronicity doesn't respond to noise. It responds to presence, it responds to clarity, and often to surrender. That's why when you stop searching in desperation, you start seeing in revelation. Not because the signs changed, but because your vision did. You weren't blind, you were just distracted. By fear, by ego, by urgency. And when that softens, the mirror clears. And the signs were always there. You just couldn't decode them through doubt. Jung believed that the unconscious communicates in symbols, dreams, and synchronicities as a way to guide us when logic fails. And in those moments when life feels disjointed, the mirror of synchronicity reflects what part of you needs reintegration. Maybe you keep seeing closed doors because your path isn't aligned with your truth. Maybe you run into the same kind of heartbreak because your boundaries haven't evolved with your growth. Maybe people leave right when you become more authentic, not as punishment, but as proof that you're no longer compatible with your past self's story. This is how synchronicity confronts us. Not with comfort, but with clarity. Not with miracles, but with messages. Every coincidence asks you, what have you been ignoring within? What emotion have you silenced that the outer world now echoes back? Maybe it's not about decoding signs, but becoming the kind of person who lives in such resonance with themselves that the whole universe feels like it's whispering the same message, again and again, until it no longer needs to, because you've listened. So if the signs have stopped showing up, maybe it's not because you're doing something wrong. Maybe it's because you already know what you need to do, and your next step is not to wait for more clues, but to act on the truth you've been avoiding, because the mirror doesn't lie. It only waits. And the question is, do you have the courage to face what it's reflecting back? In the next part, we'll look at why synchronicity often precedes deep inner shedding, and how what you're losing may actually be the final layer between you and your becoming. You thought it was just a coincidence, a passing feeling, a strange timing of events. But what if every unexplainable turn, every quiet nudge, every repeated symbol, wasn't random at all? What if it was a pattern you agreed to long before you could understand it? Carl Jung once said, "We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life." And maybe synchronicity is one of those disguises. Not fate knocking at your door, but your deeper self trying to wake you up from within. And it always begins the same way. Not with clarity, but with contradiction, because your soul doesn't grow in logic, it grows in paradox. And that's the first sign you've stepped into your real path. When the mind can't explain what the heart already knows, when everything seems out of place but somehow exactly right, and that quiet chaos, that emotional tension, that's the thread. Follow it, and you'll see what was hidden beneath the noise. Not a map, but a mirror. Because synchronicity doesn't show you the way, it shows you the truth about who you've become and who you were meant to be. And sometimes that truth comes wrapped in endings. Things fall apart, relationships crack, plans dissolve, not as punishment, but as purification. Because your next level of self can't emerge in the cage of your current identity. You must unravel to remember, and the universe, or whatever deeper intelligence we sense guiding this dance. It doesn't shout, it whispers, through numbers, through names, through fragments of memory you thought were irrelevant. And suddenly, everything aligns. Not because the world changed, but because you did. Synchronicity is not about control, it's about coherence. It's what happens when your inner world and the outer world begin to reflect each other perfectly. And in that reflection, you see it, the pattern, not imposed from above, but written from within. And every moment of doubt, every repeated lesson, every uncanny encounter, was a piece of it. Nothing was wasted. Even your delays had meaning. Even your confusion was calibrated. Even your pain had a role. Jung reminds us, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, and synchronicity forces that confrontation. Not by explaining your life, but by amplifying what you've been avoiding. And when it becomes too loud to ignore, you have a choice: deny it and loop again, or surrender and evolve. Not because it's easy, but because it's time. And you'll know it's time when what used to fit now feels like friction. When the life you built starts to feel too small for the truth you've remembered, and the next step won't be logical. It will be soulful and terrifying and freeing all at once. That's how you'll know it's yours. So here's your invitation, not to chase signs, but to become one, not to wait for destiny, but to embody the design you came here with. The pattern wasn't random. The people you met, the losses you endured, the strange timing, it wasn't chaos. It was choreography, your soul's design, unfolding exactly as it must. The only question now is, will you keep calling it coincidence, or will you finally answer the call?